Hello my friends, this is Chuck here, having just survived the remnants of Hurricane Elsa that went over yesterday and dumped 3 inches of rain on us here in Virginia, and the lake went up and now it's going down. Praise God. But it was nice not to have to use irrigation to water everything, so I've got 3 days of respite from that. And God uses all things, doesn't he, to supply our needs. And I'm going to just share a few stories in the next couple of weeks or so of our time when we were in Birmingham. I was doing my university courses, and just some things that happened that were God moments that I hope will encourage you. And for those who are listening who don't think there is a God, or he's not interested in you, or you're not interested in him, keep listening to these coincidences and I just pray that God will touch your hearts and make you smile and just be open to what he has for you and how much he loves you. So we settled in our house. Deb was a bit depressed, but then a bit depressed. She was a lot depressed actually, because everything was so different. And she actually went to work in a private hospital after a while and got a sort of nurse on call sort of job. So they called her in as and when they needed her. And we prayed that the Lord just confirmed that that's where he wanted her to be. This place had been on this hospital actually had been on the site of a religious order site, and now they'd built a private hospital on the grounds. So Deb went off each morning. I dropped her off, and then went on to the university. And this one day she went in, and she had been a cardio nurse in the States, involved in heart transplants and that sort of thing. And she came across she was talking to one of the other nurses one day about what she did in the States, and this particular private hospital was also renting out space to the National Health Service while they were building a brand new hospital for the National Health Service. So every so often the doctors would come in, use the operating rooms and various facilities there, and they would pay this private hospital for that. And she was shown a guy who came in and wanted just some sort of minor treatment, a catheterization or something like that. And something had happened, and he was now in the ICU. And I think he'd had a foot amputated, which had gone gangrenous, and the other foot was black, and his hands were turning black. And I mean, he walked into the hospital for just relatively minor treatment, and apparently what had happened, the medication that they gave him had actually reversed something. And Deborah said when she went to see him, he smelled, he smelled of death, and his extremities were beginning to deteriorate to a point where they were just becoming gangrenous. And she was so sad. She couldn't understand how this could happen, and God really touched her heart. And she came home, and later that day, I picked her up, and she was just in tears, and she said, "We've got to pray for this man. I don't know what to do. I just feel so sad that this has happened. This shouldn't happen." And so I said, "Well, we'll be praying. Let's just pray." So we started to pray for him twice a day, just prayed. And Deborah was not in that area of the hospital where the ICU was, but and I think at the end of that week we were due to go and house sit a Christian retreat centre. In fact, the one that I went to pray about us getting married. Remember? 6 weeks seeking the Lord. And so we were there, staying there, and our friends who ran it, they were away. So anybody who came, we were just to look after them. And we continued to pray. I think that was Easter weekend. And we prayed and prayed. And one day while we were there, I was just saying, Lord, and I've heard myself saying what Martha said, Lord, if you'd been here, yeah, this wouldn't have happened to this guy. And Jesus said, I am there. I'm in your prayers. And I didn't quite know what to say. We just carried on praying. I felt the Lord was saying, just keep praying. Well, when Deborah eventually went back to the hospital, she sort of got caught up in the first day, and then she suddenly remembered this guy and asked somebody, what's happened to this man? And they said, oh, haven't you heard? And for a moment, split second, she held her breath. And because people there knew that she had said that we're going to be praying, my husband and I are going to be praying for this man, and they called her the nurse who preached the Bible. So she was like one of these strange American people, you know. And for a split second, when they said, haven't you heard? She said, Lord, don't do this to me, because I stuck my neck out for you. And she said, no, what's happened? And they said, oh, he's sitting up in bed in a recovery suite. And they said, what about his hands? They were discussing with the family the possibility of amputating his hands and his other foot. I mean, this guy had walked into the hospital for some minor treatment. And they said, oh, they've gone, his extremities have gone pink again. And they were black and smelly. And Deborah said, oh gosh, I've got to go down there and see him, you know. So she actually got permission to go into that part of the hospital, and she walked in and just asked if she could talk to this guy to see him. And they didn't really know why, but she was bold, and they just said, oh, okay, go ahead. And she went up to him, and there he was. He was sort of looking at the newspaper, and although he saw her coming towards him, he didn't speak or anything. And he was sort of a little bit out of it, I think, but there his hands were pink and his other foot was pink. And she said, sir, my name is Deborah, and my husband and I have been praying for you, and Jesus has raised you up, and you will walk out of this hospital. And she sort of whispered it in a way that only he could hear it, and he just looked at her. And I'm fairly convinced that there were other people in the family who were praying, because the family were not prepared to take off life support. He was on life support. And I think I'm just sure, I don't know why I think that, I think there were people praying. And so we joined our prayers with them, I'm sure. And, you know, he did. Some weeks later, he was fitted with a prosthetic for the limb that he had removed, for the foot and everything. And he did learn to walk on that, and he did walk out of that hospital. And God did raise him up. And that was a real blessing in so many ways. We can't understand how all these things come together and how God works and why did he allow this awful thing to happen to him. But he was restored, and as far as we're concerned, Deborah had an opportunity to witness to the staff, and of course told him that Jesus had raised him up. And we had a major confirmation that's where the Lord wanted her to be for a time. And And so we saw some other things happening there. Deborah was there, just listening to the Lord, and everything was so different in that hospital. But you know, God has ways of working that we can't understand. There was another lady who had waited for 2 years for a heart bypass, and she had been a National Health Service patient, and she had come in, and they shortened the list by just booking space in the private hospitals. And she'd come in for her bypass, and she was a bit concerned about it, a bit apprehensive. And Deborah went in, and because she was on the ward where Deborah was, she recognized Deborah's American accent and just got talking to her. And Deborah was talking to her. And in fact, this lady was a spiritist who said she had healing hands. And there she was in for a bypass surgery. And she'd waited for 2 years. She came in that day, and she was going to have her operation that day. And that was one of the days that Deborah was in for work there. And they came to get her for something, get Deborah for something. And the nurse in charge was talking to her in her office, and Deborah just wanted to get back to this lady because she explained the way of salvation to this lady. And she prayed with her, and she received Jesus in all her error, you know, her spiritism, and she thought she believed in Jesus, but she got a bit confused with how spiritism and Jesus worked. But Deborah sorted her out, and she received the Lord. But Deborah was in the nurse's office, and she just wanted to get back to see her. And then they called. She was saying, "Lord, please get me out of here and I want to go and see this lady again." And they called for her to be taken down to the surgical centre. And the nurse in charge said, "Oh, would you like to take her down?" Deborah said, "You bet." So she took her down with the orderlies down to the prep area where the anaesthesiologist would administer those medications. And she looked really nervous, and Deborah said she was just stroking her hair, and she kept asking the Lord. She said, "Lord, I need a really encouraging word." All she got was, "It's going to be all right. It's going to be all right." And every time she looked up at Deborah, he was just there holding her hand and just comforting her. She opened her mouth to say something really profound, you know. And what came out was, "It's going to be all right." And they wheeled her into the room where the anaesthesiologist was and started to administer that. And she looked so frightened. And Deborah just stroked her hair and said, "It's going to be all right. It's going to be all right." And she went in for her operation. And, you know, I think it was 20 minutes into the operation, she died on the operating table. But, you know, it was all right because she had received Jesus as her Saviour. She'd heard the gospel. She'd responded. Even out of her fear of being in that place for that operation, she received Jesus. And it was all right. And she came home and told me. We were just laughing and, you know, jumping for joy. And I said, well, somebody is not going to be very happy about that, because here's this lady who's a spiritist. And one thing you get to know is that there are forces of darkness and evil at work. And they have an entity, you know, the devil and his agents. So I said, well, he's not going to be very pleased with you. And, you know, they didn't call Deborah in for I don't know how many weeks for work. Some weeks. It just dried up and stopped. But that's okay. We rejoiced anyway. And God provided what we needed, despite all of that. So, isn't it amazing when we just make ourselves available when we stand up for what we believe, that we have an influence in the places where he puts us. So God is able to do more than we ask or imagine, isn't he? He just asks us. He's just trying to reach people with his love and his salvation. And we just have to say, Lord, here we are. Send me. And we leave all the amazing things to him. And we just do what we can do. Okay. So there's just two little examples that Deborah had that really encouraged Deborah. She needed to know, in the midst of all that different medical procedures and the way things were done, even the medicines and the medications were different names, and she was really feeling out of her depth with it all, that God was saying, oh yeah, well, I've just made a way for you to be in here and just do what I tell you to do. And these are some of the jewels that we spoke about, when our eyes got accustomed to where we were, different, seemingly dark and unknown and a bit scary. But as our eyes got accustomed, we began to see those beautiful things that God wanted to do and to show us and to encourage us. So I pray that he would encourage you today and watch over you and listen to your prayers. Just listen for his whispers. Our morning prayer meeting, we were just considering Elijah, listening to the still small voice. Sometimes we expect it's all going to be like 4th of July fireworks, don't we? But very often it's just that still small voice in the depths of our being where we hear God through his word and by his spirit. So listen for those whispers, guys, and I'll be with you again next Friday. And I can't tell you how much it's a pleasure for me just to share these stories with you and just to encourage you. So be blessed this weekend. God bless.